The day Maddox walked into Brew Haven Coffee in downtown Seattle, his face ashen and his steps unsteady, I felt a strange tug in my chest that I couldn't explain. Little did I know that this brief encounter with a complete stranger would lead me to the most selfless decision of my life and eventually to the love I had spent years hiding from the world. Jackson Reynolds wiped down the espresso machine for the third time that afternoon, the familiar hum of the cafe wrapping around him like a worn blanket. At 28, he had mastered the art of the perfect pour-over and the polite smile that kept regulars coming back. Brew Haven sat nestled between a bookstore and a yoga studio in Capitol Hill, the kind of place where rainbow flags fluttered outside half the windows, yet Jackson still felt like an outsider in his own skin. He had fled his conservative Texas hometown 5 years earlier, chasing the promise of a city where he could finally breathe. The truth was, he was gay, and that truth still sat heavy in his chest every time his mother called asking when he was bringing home a nice girl. Maddox Kane ordered the same thing every visit. A large black coffee, extra shot, no room for cream. He was 32, always dressed in crisp button-downs that hinted at boardroom meetings. But today his shoulders slumped and his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the cup. Their fingers brushed, and Jackson felt that odd spark again. "Rough day?" he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Maddox offered a weak smile. "You could say that. Thanks." He left without another word, but Jackson couldn't shake the image of exhaustion etched into the man's features. Later that evening, scrolling through local news on his phone during a slow shift, Jackson froze. The headline read, "Seattle Executive Appeals for Kidney Donor as Waitlist Grows." The photo showed Maddox standing outside a hospital, looking frail but determined. "No family matches," the article said. "Rare autoimmune condition progressing faster than doctors expected." Jackson stared at the screen long after the story ended. He had lost an uncle to kidney failure back in Texas. The memory of watching a good man waste away still haunted quiet nights. The next morning Jackson called the transplant coordinator listed in the article. "I want to get tested," he said, voice steady despite the nerves twisting inside him. The woman on the line explained the process. Blood work, tissue matching, psychological evaluation. Everything would remain anonymous unless both parties agreed to meet later. Jackson hung up feeling lighter than he had in years. This wasn't about recognition. It was about doing something that mattered, something bigger than his own fears. Weeks blurred into tests and waiting. His boss, Carla, noticed the extra doctor's appointments but didn't pry. His best friend at the shop, Sarah, a straight single mom who had become like family, teased him about secret dates. "You're glowing, Jax. Spill." He laughed it off, but inside the decision solidified. When the call came confirming a near-perfect match, Jackson didn't hesitate. Surgery was scheduled for the following month. He told no one the real reason, just that he was donating to help someone in need. The night before the procedure, Jackson stood on his tiny balcony overlooking the rain-slicked streets. Seattle's lights blurred through the drizzle, mirroring the uncertainty swirling in his gut. What if something went wrong? What if his parents found out and the fragile peace he maintained with them shattered? What if this stranger never even knew the man who saved him? Jackson pushed the doubts down. Tomorrow he would give a piece of himself away, and somehow he knew his life would never be the same. The surgery went smoothly. Jackson woke in recovery with a dull ache in his side and a nurse checking vitals. "You're a hero," she said softly. He smiled through the fog of anesthesia. Across town, in another wing of the hospital, Maddox Kane received the gift that would give him back his future. Neither man knew the other's name yet, but the invisible thread between them had already begun to tighten. Jackson spent the next days resting, reading, and wondering about the stranger whose life now carried part of his own. Little did he realize that gratitude would soon knock on his door in the most unexpected way. 3 months later, the scar on Jackson's side had faded to a thin silver line, and life at Brew Haven returned to its comfortable rhythm. He poured lattes, chatted with regulars, and tried to ignore the occasional twinge when he lifted heavy bags of beans. Sarah kept bringing him protein shakes, convinced he was still recovering from that mystery illness he had vaguely described. Jackson appreciated her concern but kept the full truth locked away. Coming out about his sexuality was one thing. Admitting he had given away a kidney to a stranger felt like exposing a deeper vulnerability he wasn't ready to name. One crisp October afternoon, the bell above the door chimed, and Maddox Kane stepped inside. He looked transformed. Color in his cheeks, shoulders squared, the exhaustion replaced by quiet strength. Jackson recognized him instantly but kept his expression neutral. "Large black extra shot?" he asked, the words automatic. Maddox's eyes widened in surprise. "You remember my order?" He paused, studying Jackson more closely. "Wait, have we met before the shop?" They talked longer than usual that day. Maddox explained he had received a transplant and was finally feeling like himself again. "The donor was anonymous, but I owe that person everything." Jackson nodded, heart hammering, and changed the subject to the new pumpkin spice blend. Before leaving, Maddox slid a business card across the counter. "If you ever want to grab a real coffee, not this shop stuff, give me a call. I owe you one for all the great service." Jackson laughed, pocketing the card, the secret burning inside him like a quiet flame. 2 weeks passed before Jackson worked up the courage to text. They met at a small waterfront cafe on a Saturday morning, the kind with outdoor heaters and views of the ferries cutting through Elliott Bay. Maddox arrived early, already holding 2 coffees. They talked for hours. Maddox's high-pressure job in tech marketing, his recent health scare that made him reevaluate everything, the loneliness that crept in during hospital nights. Jackson shared pieces of his own story, Texas roots, the move west, the way Seattle had opened his eyes even as old fears lingered. He stopped short of mentioning the donation or his sexuality, but the conversation flowed easily, laughter coming naturally. As weeks turned into months, their friendship deepened. They hiked Discovery Park on weekends, grabbed late-night tacos in Ballard, and debated everything from favorite books to city politics. Jackson found himself looking forward to Maddox's texts more than he cared to admit. There was something about the man's steady presence, the way his dark eyes lit up when he laughed, that made Jackson's carefully guarded heart stir. Yet he kept the secret of the kidney locked tight. Revealing it now felt like risking everything they were building. One evening over Thai food in Maddox's sleek Belltown apartment, Maddox grew quiet. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, setting down his fork. Jackson's stomach dropped, fearing the worst. "I'm gay," Maddox continued softly. "I figured it out years ago, but after my last relationship blew up, I kept it quiet at work. The transplant made me realize life is too short for hiding." The words hung between them like a bridge. Jackson stared at his plate, pulse racing. This was his moment, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply said, "Me too." The admission felt like releasing a breath he had held for years. Maddox reached across the table and squeezed his hand. For the first time, Jackson didn't pull away. Winter rain drummed against the windows of Jackson's small studio as he stared at the phone in his hand. His mother's voice still echoed from the call earlier. "When are you coming home for Christmas, honey? Your father misses you." The guilt twisted deeper, knowing he would have to lie again about his life. Maddox had invited him to spend the holiday together, just the two of them, and the idea both thrilled and terrified Jackson. Their friendship had quietly shifted into something more tender over the past weeks. Stolen kisses on rainy evenings, long talks until dawn. Yet the secret of the donation still sat between them like an unopened letter. At the cafe the next day, Sarah cornered him during a lull. "You've been different lately, Jax. Happier. Is there someone?" He couldn't hide the smile. "Yeah. His name is Maddox." Sarah hugged him tightly. "About time you let yourself be happy." Her support felt like solid ground, but Jackson knew the real test would come from Texas. Maddox's health checkups continued, and one appointment brought unexpected news. The doctors warned of possible long-term complications if he didn't manage stress carefully. "I want to live fully," Maddox told Jackson that night, pulling him close on the couch. "With you." The words wrapped around Jackson's heart, but doubt crept in. Was this gratitude or real love? He pushed the thought away and kissed Maddox instead, letting the moment erase the questions. The holidays arrived with twinkling lights along Pike Place Market. Jackson and Maddox decorated Maddox's apartment together, laughing as they argued over tinsel placement. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged simple gifts. Jackson gave Maddox a first edition book he had hunted down, and Maddox presented Jackson with a custom leather journal. "For all the stories you're still afraid to write," he said softly. Later, curled together watching snow flurries that rarely fell in Seattle, Jackson almost told him everything. The words hovered on his tongue but slipped away when Maddox fell asleep against his shoulder. New Year's brought the first real crack. Jackson's mother called again, this time pressing for details about his roommate. Jackson froze. Maddox overheard and gently suggested, "Maybe it's time to tell them about us." The suggestion ignited Jackson's deepest fear. "You don't understand what they're like," he snapped, sharper than intended. Hurt flashed across Maddox's face, and the evening ended in awkward silence. Jackson lay awake that night, the scar on his side aching like a reminder of everything he still hid. January brought colder truths. At work, a new regular, an older conservative customer, made a snide comment about the rainbow flag outside. Jackson ignored it, but when the man returned the next week with friends and the comments grew louder, Carla had to step in. Jackson felt exposed. The weight of prejudice he had fled Texas to escape now following him home. Maddox listened patiently over dinner, sharing his own past experiences with workplace bias before the transplant forced him to slow down. "We're stronger together," he said, but Jackson wondered if his secrets would eventually break them apart. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms exploding along the streets, and Jackson felt the seasons mirroring the changes inside him. His relationship with Maddox had grown deeper, filled with quiet mornings making coffee together and weekend drives to the Olympic Peninsula. Yet the secret of the kidney donation gnawed at him like an unresolved chord. Every time Maddox mentioned how the transplant saved his life, Jackson felt the words rise and die in his throat. He told himself it was to protect the purity of what they had built, but deep down he knew it was fear. One sunny Saturday they hiked to the top of Rattlesnake Ledge. Standing at the edge with the valley spread below, Maddox turned to him. "I want you to meet my sister next month. She's flying in from Chicago." Jackson smiled, but inside panic flared. Meeting family meant questions, meant risking exposure. That evening back at Maddox's apartment, the conversation turned serious. "I know you're not ready to tell your parents," Maddox said gently, "but I need to know where we stand. I love you, Jackson." The declaration hung in the air, beautiful and terrifying. Jackson whispered it back, meaning every syllable, yet the weight of his hidden truth pressed harder. The following week, a letter arrived from the transplant center. Both parties had agreed to an optional meeting program, and Maddox's name was listed. Jackson's hands shook as he read it. The moment he had dreaded and secretly hoped for had arrived. He could no longer hide. That night he drove to Maddox's place unannounced, heart pounding. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, voice cracking. Maddox listened in stunned silence as Jackson poured out the entire story, the tests, the surgery, the months of silence. When he finished, tears glistened in Maddox's eyes. "You saved my life," he whispered, pulling Jackson into a fierce embrace. "And now you're my whole life." The revelation brought them closer, but it also stirred new complications. Maddox insisted on telling his sister the full story during her visit. She arrived full of gratitude and questions, embracing Jackson warmly yet probing gently about his family. "They don't know about any of this?" she asked over dinner. Jackson shook his head. The conversation left him raw. Meanwhile, at the cafe, business picked up with the warmer weather, but so did the tension. The conservative regular returned with a group, complaining loudly about certain lifestyles influencing the neighborhood. Carla asked them to leave, but the incident spread on local social media. Customers took sides, and for the first time Jackson felt truly seen in a way that scared him. Maddox offered to come by the shop more often for support, but Jackson worried it would only fuel the fire. One quiet evening Maddox surprised Jackson with plane tickets to Texas. "We don't have to tell them everything yet," he said, but facing your past together might help you heal. Jackson stared at the tickets, the old fears roaring back. He loved Maddox enough to consider it, yet the thought of his father's disappointed stare made his stomach turn. The decision loomed like a storm cloud, and Jackson realized that love, real love, demanded more than he had ever given. The flight to Dallas felt like stepping backward in time. Jackson gripped Maddox's hand the entire way, the scar on his side throbbing with phantom memory. Maddox had insisted they go, promising to support whatever Jackson chose to share. "No pressure," he repeated softly as the plane descended. But pressure was exactly what waited at the small ranch-style house on the outskirts of town. Jackson's parents greeted them warmly at first, his mother fussing over coffee and his father clapping him on the back like old times. Maddox was introduced as a good friend from Seattle, the lie tasting bitter on Jackson's tongue. The visit started smoothly enough, barbecues in the backyard and stories of city life. But on the third evening, after a few beers, his father asked the inevitable question. "So when are you settling down with a nice girl, son?" The room grew quiet. Jackson glanced at Maddox, whose calm gaze gave him courage. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you both." The words tumbled out. His sexuality, the years of hiding, and finally, with shaking voice, the kidney donation that had brought Maddox into his life. Silence stretched like a taut wire. His mother's eyes filled with tears, but his father's face hardened. "We raised you better than this," he said quietly before walking out. The next morning brought cold distance. His mother hugged him tightly at the airport, whispering, "I love you, but this is a lot." Maddox stayed silent on the flight home, giving Jackson space to process the rejection. Back in Seattle, the emotional fallout hit hard. Jackson threw himself into work, avoiding deep conversations, the old fears of abandonment resurfacing stronger than ever. Maddox tried to bridge the gap with patience and small gestures, but misunderstandings grew. One night an argument erupted over nothing, Jackson accusing Maddox of pitying him because of the donation. "Is that why you're with me?" he shouted. Maddox's hurt expression cut deeper than any words. Sarah became the voice of reason at the cafe. "You're pushing away the best thing that's ever happened to you," she told him during a closing shift. Jackson knew she was right, but pride and pain kept him stubborn. Meanwhile, Maddox faced his own crisis. A work promotion required travel that would strain their already fragile connection. He turned it down without telling Jackson at first, a sacrifice that later sparked another misunderstanding when Jackson found the email. "You can't keep giving up pieces of yourself for me," Jackson said, voice breaking. The lowest point came during a rainy April evening. Jackson showed up at Maddox's door soaked and shaking. "I almost lost you once before I even knew you," he admitted. "I can't lose you now because I'm scared." They talked through the night, laying every fear on the table. Family rejection, health worries, societal whispers. By morning the air felt clearer. Maddox suggested couples counseling, a step neither had considered before. Jackson agreed, recognizing that growth required more than love alone. Slowly the cracks began to mend, but the real test still waited. Summer brought warmth and a tentative peace. Jackson and Maddox attended their first counseling session together, the therapist guiding them through exercises that peeled back layers of fear and resentment. Jackson learned to voice his insecurities without accusation, while Maddox practiced setting boundaries around his own sacrifices. Their bond strengthened in the quiet work of understanding. At Brew Haven, the controversy had faded as new regulars replaced the old ones, and Carla promoted Jackson to assistant manager, a role that finally felt like stability. Maddox's sister visited again, this time bringing her husband and a genuine acceptance that helped heal old wounds. One evening over dinner she raised a toast. "To the man who gave my brother back his life and then stole his heart." The laughter around the table felt like family in a way Jackson's blood relatives never had. Inspired, Jackson finally sent a long letter to his parents in Texas, not demanding acceptance but sharing his truth and the happiness he had found. Weeks later a short reply arrived. His mother wrote that she was trying to understand and hoped to visit Seattle someday. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. As autumn leaves turned gold along Lake Washington, Jackson and Maddox took a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands. On a quiet beach at sunset, Maddox dropped to one knee, a simple silver band in his hand. "You saved my life twice, once with your kidney and once with your heart. Marry me?" Jackson pulled him up into a fierce embrace, tears mixing with the sea spray. Yes, the proposal wasn't grand, but it was theirs, built on sacrifice, honesty, and the slow, beautiful work of becoming whole. Back in Seattle, they began planning a small wedding for the following spring, inviting Sarah, Maddox's sister, and a few close friends. Jackson still carried the scar, a permanent reminder that the greatest gifts often come wrapped in risk. He had grown from a man hiding in shadows to one standing openly in the light, no longer defined by fear but by the love he chose every day. Maddox, stronger and more grounded, had found purpose beyond his career, volunteering at transplant support groups and speaking openly about his journey. Together they faced the world as partners, proving that one anonymous act of kindness could ripple into a lifetime of meaning. True or false? A single selfless choice made for a stranger can truly lead to the kind of love that reshapes two entire lives despite every obstacle family, society, and fear can throw in its path.